So Julien, that's an oh, you'll need a microphone.
Thank you.
Such an amazing bio. I hardly know where to start, but I will get into it by saying that I've been following your Substack called Moral Fragments, which is an eclectic and reflective series. Could you explain to our audience how you began the project and what you were seeking to achieve with it?
Yeah, well, there's a prehistory to things. So I think the first prehistory was training in a French environment in high school, learning Greek, learning philosophy, and kind of thinking, hey, these people are encouraging us to practice virtues. Why don't I do that? And I was a little perplexed. Maybe I was too geeky, and some of my classmates were thinking of it intellectually or abstractly, and I was like, but we need to do this thing. Mm-hmm. And so that's when the interest started. So that's kind of the long prehistory. Then there's I'd say the first iteration, 2017. I had started working with a Swedish foundation on global catastrophic risk prevention and global governance innovation. So I was their editor, I was looking into the black box of all of these very big, dangerous things that might lead to the world collapsing. And of course, it brought a lot of anxiety and a lot of sense of, well, is that in my control, how to do this, etc. Seems important. And as a result, one of the ways that I dealt with it, I think, was to return to virtue ethics and saying, well, one thing is in my control, which is to consistently build character. And I might return to that tradition that is mine of the Stoics and the 4 cardinal virtues. And so I had this first iteration of spending a year systematically developing courage, temperance, wisdom, and justice, and writing about it. It's also my primary form of expression, writing. It was in my control, I could do it. Then I went on to study Confucian ethics and Buddhist, etc. And then there was a kind of a return to it this year as I started other projects, wanted to return to blogging. Went and created a Substack. But I think for this one, so one element is personal accountability, just doing the things. There's also a grieving for a certain online social life that we used to have when Facebook was better, essentially, or Twitter or whatever. And I thought, well, let's see if we can return to this by writing something that is interesting and reflective. And of course, there's a sense of, oh, it would be wonderful if the whole world kind of followed, but essentially it's for my friends. I have about 40 people following me who are close friends, and it's a way of being in conversation with them, really. So yeah, it's accountability and resistance to anxietification, I think, is why I'm doing it.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. So, and this is a huge question, and you've kind of started to answer, I guess. But how do you think that ancient philosophy, and I mean in the broad, not just Stoicism perhaps, but contribute to our lives today? So, and because that's such a huge question, can you break it down to some elements and think of it in parts, perhaps?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, the thing I might start with is what we learn from the practice of philology. So the active reading of ancient texts in a different language, and how that teaches a form of intellectual humility. It reminds us that understanding something requires effort. When we read a text that's kind of in our language and optimized for us, it seems immediate, and then we kind of have a quick judgment. We say, oh, I agree, I disagree. When we have a text by Aristotle in Greek in front of us, immediate judgment is more difficult because at first we don't get anything. And it takes a long time to even start deciphering it. And that slowness reminds us, yes, I probably misunderstand what's being said. Particularly when I learned to read ancient Greek, there was always this attention to, but are you interpreting it correctly? It doesn't make immediate sense. Is it because the text is corrupted? Is it because I'm missing the context? Is it because I don't understand the meaning of this word? Like, why is it? So it also reminds us that our knowledge is patchy, that we just miss a whole lot of stuff. And all of this is just extraordinarily healthy, I find, from an intellectual perspective. So that's I think that's the core of it, is this practice of philology. And then from that come a few side benefits for today. So the first is, I would say, vaccine against the caveman argument. And we've all been in those conversations or heard those speakers who made grand claims about the world, and suddenly comes the moment when there's a reference. And the reason this is true is because if we think about our ancestors who were living in caves and when they were chasing the mammoth, and just like, how do you know that thing? How is that true? So when somebody brings in an argument that anchors a reasoning that comes from who knows where, it's a good vaccine. You're like, that is probably made up. Because I know that a lot of stuff is made up, because when I was reading ancient Greek, I learned that a lot of things were made up or void, or we just didn't know. It teaches us to be comfortable that we just don't know. A lot is lost, and operating in that uncertainty. And then it's also a great vaccine against the tyranny of the present. Because if we don't anchor ourselves in this old past, we're probably going to be anchored in the latest thought leader. And quite frankly, I think I prefer the Stoics.
Line of the day right there. I couldn't agree more, Julien, and I think there certainly are a lot, to your point, Steve, there are a lot of just so stories in, I would say particularly in evolutionary psychology, for example, a lot of, guesstimates perhaps at an imagined distant past, which we really don't know much more about than the Greeks knew about their legendary past, I might add. So yes, I think I couldn't agree more with you, Julien, about the fact that studying other languages, any other language, but particularly ancient languages, imposes a discipline on us and a humility, an absolutely inevitable humility, because so much of our subject matter has been lost, and there also are different and entirely valid readings of the same text. Different interpretations can be perfectly well justified, but they have to be justified. Now, you're one of the few people I know who I could actually ask this question. As someone who's fluent in Chinese language as well as Latin and Greek, how would you compare the learning of those different languages?
So I'll qualify fluent to, there has been a moment in my life where I could have qualified as proficient. So let's lower the expectation a little. But there's the self-evident thing that, you look at Latin and it looks like Indo-European language that we speak, and you look at Chinese and it doesn't look anything. So there's kind of immediate strangeness that's present. But there's something behind it, which is, so I grew up in Strasbourg. I used to play in front of the Council of Europe as a child, and I grew up really with this European dream of unity through unifying cultures, and learning foreign languages was a policy of the European Union to integrate the different countries. And so I had this sense that by learning another language, I was doing my duty as a European citizen. So I was just learning to be European, not just French, essentially. And learning Greek and Latin was part of that to an extent. It was entering that old European tradition. But it was also really connecting with my own roots to an extent. My family is Mediterranean. My father grew up in a small town in the south of France, but the local city, let's call it that, was Nîmes, which had a Roman amphitheater. And so my cousin lived there, and 2 minutes away there was a Roman amphitheater. It was just there. And so learning Latin was learning the language of the people who built a building that was just next door somehow. So there was this sense of continuity that was really important. Learning Chinese was completely different, because all I'd be trained to think was that this was the other, this was the unreachable, this was the bizarre octopus alien that you couldn't possibly think like, all of this. So all of this otherness, othering. And by integrating it and connecting with it, there was this sense of, well, actually, here's also human beings who are in a dialectic, complex relationship with their own tradition in the same way that I am with mine, and that's hugely relatable. as a kind of a fun anecdote that I like to take, as a Mediterranean, I've been trained to think that my culture is the center of the world and everyone else is a barbarian. And the place where I felt that the most was in the region of Shanghai, Suzhou, Nanjing, where here are also people who believe that the rest of the world are utter barbarians. And I was like, oh, we're the same.
That's really, actually, I'm reading at the moment a book which some of you might be interested in, which is totally relevant to this. It's called Oikophobia by Benedict Beckeld, and he examines this very phenomenon that different societies have considered themselves as of course, the centre of the world and all the others barbarians, and he really looks at those dynamics. But yeah, what you're saying is so evocative, Julien. So yes, what a great perspective. Early on when we became acquainted, Julien, you mentioned your work on the virtues attempted to bring a queer lens to the project. Can you explain for our audience what that involved and how it contributes to your viewpoint?
So there's various aspects to that. The first is kind of coming to virtue ethics and Stoicism and all this as a gay man, and then there's all of these stories of, what was the word we're using? Broicism. It's like you have to be athletic and you need to do sports and stuff. I was like, I'm not interested in any of this really. What about wigs or something? But so it's a way of connecting for myself with that tradition, with those virtues that have a universality to it, while anchoring them in different points of difference. Essentially thinking, well, that's useful for me, and then maybe it's useful for some of my friends, the 40 people who read it, or others. So there's that element. There's another element which is, I call it almost healing from homophobia. Like there's a sense in sort of a post-Christian, post-Victorian society that men having sex with men, because women they don't have a sexuality, so we don't even think about that. But men having sex with men is the utter worst abomination. And for the ancients, that was a kind of a non-question. Like, that was perfectly normal. And so, hanging out with that was one of the appeals, actually, of studying Greek at the time. So, being in that cultural environment is hugely healing, because suddenly it becomes indifferent. Even when I was a geeky young man in my college, I was head of the LGBTQ club, and we had a quote from the symposium that says something along the lines of, the reason that the barbarians prohibit love between men is because they're very afraid of the virtue and sense of duty that comes with it, and they want their citizens to be slaves, and as a result, they do not encourage that kind of love. So there's that element. But then I think a third aspect of it is, as a queer man, I don't have the role models of masculinity or building a family or all of that, so I have to do a bit more of invention. There's a plasticity of how to live that's important, and in order to develop myself with this greater plasticity, I look for something to be anchored in, and virtue traditions are extremely healthy. So it's kind of, okay, it will be unconventional, but it will follow those principles. So it's almost the sort of the anchor or the weights in order to have an atypical or original life that is not completely detached or mad. It's almost a guardrail against the madness that can come from not conforming, I would say. So yeah, that's kind of how I approach it and how I think of it.
Wow, yeah. So many layers and so beautifully expressed, Julien. It was just wonderful. So if anyone hasn't read Plato's Symposium, can recommend, as they say. In the reading group that Courtney and Travis and I and Catherine are part of, we've read the Symposium twice, I think. We think it's about time we needed to read it a third time. So thanks, Julien. I've taken a quote from one of your recent Substacks from August, when you were talking about wisdom, and you wrote, that everything we do comes from the body. Now, this is also something that in our reading group we've been investigating. We've been reading texts around embedded cognition. I mean, the Stoics, again, were way ahead of their time by considering us as we're not just computers, we're not just brains, we are embodied, and everything that we do is as an embodied being or organism, as Courtney says. So these are all fascinating ideas, and I just wondered if you could expand on your ideas around embodiment.
Thanks. I might start with a story so maybe 6 months ago, I've got a friend who runs a school of innovation and entrepreneurship nearby, and he invited to come and talk to some of his students in the Diploma of Business about having a sort of an atypical exploratory career. And so I did my presentation, it was very nice, and they loved it, and all this. And then this young man raises his hand and said, Julien, can I ask a question? Well, that's what we're here for. And said, look, it seems that you have a sense of what you want to do. And my problem is, I don't know. And therefore, it's very difficult for me to make a decision. How do you make a decision, and how do you figure out what you want? And I paused for a long time, because I thought, this person is asking a real serious question. And then I realized retrospectively, I haven't been taught to do that very well, except maybe in my Greek class and philosophy class. And so I paused for a long time, and then I looked at him and I said, well, there's a thing that happens to me, which is I churn through ideas and I kind of try to visualize them. And there's a moment when there's a sort of a flutter that comes up in the chest and up in the face. And that tells me that the thing that I'm considering is right. And I believe that that's the best mechanism to know that something is right. I don't really know of a better one to confirm it. And he kind of looked and said, oh, thanks. So that's the story. But beyond the story, there's a lot of... I've been trained very late in life to do various things around like systemic constellations, or using various forms of Qigong or embodied practice to help either with healing, realigning all of this, or gain greater personal clarity. When just the cognitive brain or the data processing isn't sufficient. And I realized that I hadn't been trained, and we're very, very bad at doing that. And I'm learning to do that. But that often it's where I go back to when it actually comes to trying to understand and know it. So I think that's how I would think about it. And then also by working with the body, we kind of learn our own, like what's resisting this thing that's kind of us and not us, and what's the shape. So it's also a great teacher, I think. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. 100%. And I love that Julien, you sort of located this fluttering thing in the mid-body. I mean, the ancient Stoics were cardiocentric. They insisted that the ruling faculty is located in the heart. Now, of course, they get a lot of flack for that these days, but I think science is more and more teaching us that again, we're not just disembodied computers, and that's one of the reasons why I'm so against ideas of humans as computers, because it's not how we are really. We're organisms, as we continue to insist, and part of that is our brain is connected intimately through to our mid-body and all the things that are going on there, and the connections they go both directions or all directions. So, and I think work in neurology just underscores that. So, yeah, that was fascinating, Julien. Thank you. Another issue that you've warned about in your writing is something very relevant to our age, which is digital addiction. What do you see as some of the risks and productive approaches here?
So, yeah. So I spend a lot of time on a computer. My work life is it's complicated, but a lot of it is editing. And I'm an extrovert, and so I do this thing, and it's 3 degrees remote, and so Minesweeper is very, very dangerous for me. And something is difficult, and the sentence resists, and next I know it's 3 hours later, but I've beat the best score, or whatever is happening. And I'm independent, so there's nobody to look over my shoulder that I need to behave well for. So that's very dangerous. I'm kind of prey to that because it's very well done and it's usually addictive and all of this. So some of the techniques include that I've seen work is kind of sideways replacement, and it's essentially accepting, okay, it seems that the reason I'm doing that is because I'm putting too much pressure on myself to be focused for too long. What if instead of playing Minesweeper, I was to do a MOOC about the law, because I'm a bit of a nerd, and that there, and then I'm going to get a certificate, and I'll get a dopamine hit, and at least I will have learned something. Or I might watch this quirky movie or episode of a TV series, so at least I connect to characters. So it's essentially, it's replacing something that's more harmful with something that's less harmful, and sort of just retraining the habit, and kind of returning, it's almost this mindful, well, this seems to be where I'm at. Let's not be in denial about it. What could be 1 degree better? And then maybe from that we can lift up. So that's the first element. That's the kind of the gaming thing. The other element is the social aspect. And here, well, I've stayed clear of Instagram. So one way is to just not be on it, which has been my thing with Instagram. But what I observe here is a sense of grief. I remember when Facebook was good, and when I had interactions with people there that were meaningful and being globally connected. Like, it was an incredible tool of cosmopolitanism. Like, if you want to connect the whole world, the internet is there. And it's been engineered deliberately by designers and the people who own the company that they work for to be addictive and to be destructive. So we need to resist that, and leaving it all together. I think that the panic room attack may not be the best. We need to keep investing in those spaces, but then when we invest them, we're grabbed into them. And it's just, the thing I'm trying to tap into is kind of the emotion which often is a sense of grief that there's no more connection. And yeah, I don't know that I have a solution. I have an acknowledgement. And I think that ultimately the solution would be organizing for a different model and trying to invest, I don't know, Mastodon or whatever is the platform that's non-addictive and that's optimized for us, a Stoic platform or something. They don't exist, but we can create them. It's not impossible. So trying to do that and accept what's there in the meantime and our own failings. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one way to look at it and is that social media and all those associated programs are tools. They're indifferents, right? They can be used for good and they can be used for evil. And yeah, it's around, again, seeing where your own sensitivities are. I personally find time limits is good. And for when I have to get a writing task done or something else, I use Pomodoro timers, which I think is again a useful tool to focus on the thing that has to be done. But you're absolutely right. I mean, again, coming back to the problems that Jacqueline was alluding to, for younger people, there are very serious problems around internet addiction. Now, another addiction you've mentioned is overeating, which, of course, would be covered by our old friend, the Stoic virtue of temperance or self-control. And you've written about practices such as intermittent fasting. Can you comment on how such practices might have worked for you?
Yeah. So in the this year, as part of the practice of moderation, there's two elements. One is trying to see how can I just eat a bit less, because the other thing I do when I don't play Minesweeper is kind of, oh, this is a bit difficult. What about a cookie or a muffin or something? And I guess that's completely not relatable for anyone. The thing that I've seen work very, very well and is actually quite simple, and I'm surprised that I don't do that, is to eat more slowly and to just pay a lot of attention to the food, so that rather than needing 3 muffins to have my satisfaction, I can have like a little bit of an apple, but really, really savor it. But I observed that and it's this kind of embodied thing, by slowing down and increasing attention, I can get the same amount of pleasure or satisfaction or relief or whatever it is that I seem to need in the moment, with something that's far less harmful, and it's a form of control, essentially, managing the rhythm. So that's the thing that I've seen work well. But I also try to say, okay, can I detach from food as satisfaction? And that's where fasting comes in. a lot of friends are been fasting, and I'm thinking, well, surely I can try it. And so the way that I practice this year is I have weeks. So it's 13 cycles of 4 weeks and 1 virtue per week. During moderation week, I have to fast for 1 day. But I'm not a faster. I come from a hedonistic family. I've never fasted in my life. So the first time I tried, I went to an Indian friend who said, well, there's this model where you have like breakfast and an apple for lunch, and then you can have dinner. And I thought, I'll try this. And I tried this. It was on a Sunday. I had to do some work. At about 10:30 a.m., the only thing I could think about was food. I was just obsessed. And I realized, okay, so this is my baseline. Let's acknowledge that this is where I'm starting from. And then the only way is up. Then I tried again not having work, and I turned it into a kind of an experimental day. It's like taking the day off. I can have coffee outside in cafes, but I can't have food. And that was fun. I was kind of floating, except at 4:30 I had enough and I had a glass of wine. So not so much for moderation, but improved. I tried with a hike. And then I kind of thought, okay, what about I flip it? Because I kept having this image of myself, I cannot fast. And as long as I had that narrative, it was of course very difficult. I was talking to someone who said, well, I don't eat in the morning. I thought, well, maybe I can try that. Because I kept joking, well, I fast every night from about 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. to 8 a.m. And I said, well, surely I can stretch that. And then that week I just thought, well, maybe I'll do, a 12-hour fast 4 days, and then I'll do one where I don't have breakfast. But that was 16 hours. And that actually worked, and I realized that that was easy, but also it's completely shifted the narrative in my head. And now I identify as somebody who can fast. And I haven't yet pushed to the moment when I fast for 24 hours, but I can sense that it might be possible before the end of the year. So yeah, work around and trying different things. And acknowledging the baseline, I think, is also where it is, and then working up from here.
Yeah, that's really important. I think you're absolutely right. So you combined a practice and a change narrative, and realised that the change in the narrative was something that you would take forward. So taking a step back now, a different frame. As someone who's worked in the diplomatic and global space, do you think that philosophical principles can make a difference here, even when so many projects have to involve compromise? So that's going to be a big subject as well.
So, okay. So there's a first element of it, which is So I'm thinking of a form of Stoicism that seems to me a perversion of the idea, which is because I need to focus on what's in my control and let go of the rest, as a result, I will explicitly focus on doing things that I'm able to succeed at.
Yes.
And I think that that's perverted. And that actually what that might teach us is, well, I'll do things, and then I will accept that maybe these things that are probably the right things to do are not going to succeed. Because they're too difficult, they're too high, they're too ambitious, but we're doing them nonetheless because that seems to be the wisest thing to do in the moment. And that project I was involved in at the time was trying to reinvent global governance, which of course seems impossible. But then so is kind of life at +6 degrees. And so choosing between those impossibilities, might as well try to reinvent global governance, which seems more possible than life at +6 degrees or +8 or whatever. And then maybe I won't succeed, this team won't succeed, that's okay. Another one will. If we don't do it, it's less likely that the team will succeed at all. So there's that sort of letting go of the outcome, but focusing on doing the thing nonetheless, and a number of other projects I'm involved in, there's that principle. So that's one aspect. Another aspect is when doing those things that are kind of high level and diplomatic and require a whole lot of interests to be managed, the locus of control is very far. And therefore it's easy to become cynical or detached, all of this. And focusing on virtue ethics, that's the thing I can control. And therefore it creates a balance. It means I can operate in that world without having a sense that I have to completely compromise. I can continue to exert wisdom, and then the wisdom tells me, well, there's all of these 17 people who want different things, and I need to compose with them, but I have that in that's very precious, I think, to continue. And it creates a bridge. It's a good way of building diplomatic conversations in terms of building common ground. Because those are, like, they're Stoic virtues, but they're also the 4 of the 6 core strengths that the strengths positive psychology develops, and we find things that are not completely dissimilar in other cultures. So it's a good basis to start from. It's kind of, okay, let's return to what would it look like for us to be wise or courageous. And it's a way to return to that collective understanding, even if it's at high level principles, and so it just moves forward. Same thing as me with fasting. It's kind of, we just move a little bit further down the line. Yeah, I think that's how I would think of it.
Yeah, that's absolutely brilliant. Classics nerd question. Are you Team Latin or Team Greek, and why?
I'm Team Greek all the way. That was my first love. And the actual reason is very embarrassing, is when I was but I'll share it nonetheless. When I was a kid in France, we had all of these Japanese cartoons, and there was this one, I think it's called Prince Seiya, in here, which was all the Knights of the Zodiac. And it was this kind of like people who had magical armors, and then they went to get some sort of, save the goddess Athena or her reincarnation in some sort of land, etc. And that got me hooked into Greek. I was hooked to that cartoon and said, I want to learn Greek. So that, but then I love the language. It's kind of more exotic than Latin, and mainly it's very polycentric. There's all of these different centers and variants, and it doesn't have this sense that Rome is the true place and the others aren't, like it's Ionian or Athenian. So I like the fact that it feels freer to me as a language.
Well, I'm Team Latin, just saying. but you're right in the sense that both Greek is absolutely the language of the cosmopolitan Greek world. On the other hand, Latin was also a cosmopolitan language too. So yes. Julien, you're a highly creative person, and I'm very interested in what projects you may have going forward. Is there anything you'd like to share with us about future directions and plans?
Mm-hmm. So, well, continuing Moral Fragments this year, and then I'll see where that goes. I recently started an initiative, it's called Shapeshifters Group, and it's an association gathering all of the professionals who do the work that falls between the cracks. So in-house, outer, or on-demand, people who work as head of special projects, chief of staff, or interim execs, or look at ecosystem weaving, like all of these weird job titles and community building, gathering it, demystifying it, creating language around it, empowering them. So that's one. I'm working on a book on stimulating political imagination, kind of on the aftermath of that foundation that's coming out hopefully next year. And I'm doing work with an organization called the World Ethic Forum that's based in Switzerland, that's looking at what would the practices look like that are coherent with an ecocentric worldview, which is actually very aligned with the way that the Stoics think. And I'm going to start editorial work with them. So that's also an interesting space to follow. Those are the main ones, I would say.
Wow, so this has been amazing, and I'm sure you would join with me in thanking Dr. Julien Leyre. Now, has anyone got any questions for Julien? Yeah, Leo.
Yeah, I'm just interested in your French background and why the French have done Stoicism, with Pierre Hadot. Was that are we missing out on publications in French that should be translated in English?
So, okay. Publication. There's one person who's interesting. We actually studied together called Pierre Vesperini, who's a classicist. He's written about philosophical and wisdom traditions in Rome and Greece. So he's interesting. He's got a few things in English, I think.
So what was that name, Julien?
Pierre Vesperini.
Any other thoughts and questions? If you want to follow Julien's work, if you go to Substack and look for Moral Fragments, It's very interesting, and Julian's a prolific Substacker. There's one every week. Yeah.
I got one for you. Julian, I've since learning about Stoicism myself, I've batted around the idea of the trolley problem. Kind of, what would a the ideal Stoic, a sage, how would the trolley problem look to a sage? I've kind of landed personally on something that I didn't think was important, but I think to me comes out in a lot of Stoic stuff around intention is everything. When it comes to virtue ethics, I don't know, your commentary on the importance of intention, as in it's not just the actions, or sometimes the actions are irrelevant. It's about what you were hoping to do, what was in your heart when you were doing the thing. I don't know, just a general commentary on what you reckon. Talk about the trolley problem if you like, your views on it, or with a Stoic lens. Or.
Thanks. I think I actually write about that in one of my blog posts. And the way that I think of it is kind of like virtue ethics around continuity of character. And we think of the trolley problem as this one moment, and then that's the moment that will decide all of your life.
Yeah.
But another way of looking at it is, but wait a minute, why is there a train? Why is somebody attached on the rails? Like, why are they not hearing? Why is there a dog and suddenly there's a grandmother? And like, why is a pregnant woman with a dog and a grandmother attached to the rail tracks? Like, what fucked up world is that? And what is in my power to try to create a world where grandmothers are not attached to railway tracks, so that we don't have to put train drivers into some sort of bizarre ethical dilemmas about them. And I think, but I'm kind of joking about it, but that's, I think, is the Stoic approach to the trolley problem. It's kind of, what are the conditions that created the problem in the first time, and what is in our power to do? And then extend compassion to the person who happens to be the tram driver when the grandmother was attached to the rail with a dog next to her. That.
No, that's great. Thanks.
Yeah. Brilliant. All right. I think you agree with me that Julian embodies a great deal of wisdom. So thanks once again, Julian.
Thank you.
Okay, so our next session is an in conversation, and it's the special one that I'm really looking forward to. Brigadier